Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with John and Fritz Plous. Thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure.
So tell me, how did your family come to Kenosha?
I'll let Fritz tell that because he remembers dates better than I do.
I've seen a document that seems to say that my grandfather, Louis Plous, emigrated from Europe in 1906, and he didn't come from his home in Poland. He was raised in northeastern Poland in a little Jewish shtetl, a typical shtetl called Sopotskin, which is very poor. He and his brother, his younger brother Morris, apparently were sent at some point in their youth to some relatives in Sweden. And they actually emigrated from Sweden. And my father had, I'm sure you've got in your files somewhere, his naturalization papers, in which he renounces allegiance to all foreign all foreign princes and potentates, to wit, King Oscar IX of Sweden.
So did they come directly to Kenosha, or did they go to someplace else before coming to Kenosha?
My understanding is my grandfather, Louis Plous, and his brother, Morris Plous, first went to Chicago and got jobs at the Pullman Palace Car Works, where they, like a lot of Jewish boys, they knew the fabric trades, and they worked as upholsterers, reupholstering the seats in Pullman sleeping cars.
Okay. And how long did they do that before they moved up to Kenosha?
My understanding was only a short time. It was never intended to be a career. It was a kind of a transition to ease them into the next phase of their emigration, and probably less than a year. And then some relative told them there was opportunity in Kenosha, Wisconsin, so they went there.
And we know that my father was born in Kenosha in 1909, so they were certainly here by then, and his brother Harry was older. And do you know if Harry was born in Kenosha?
Probably.
Yeah. So they were probably here 2 years earlier than that.
You know, the two Plous brothers married two Korff sisters from a neighboring town just across the border in Lithuania. And so I got double cousins all up and down the family.
Adeline Korff married Louis Plous, and Francis Korff married Morris Plous. Morris was younger brother, right?
Yeah.
And Morris did not, I think he died in, I checked at the temple, I think he died in 1932, so he was not very old when he passed away.
By the way, Morris Plous died of the family disease. We have a family disease called polycystic kidney. You can check it out. It is transmitted from a parent. It skips the first child, but it gets the second child. And Morris Plous was the second oldest in the Plous family. My grandfather did not have this disease, but Morris caught it, and his son Harold Plous died of it back in the 50s. And
he was Sonny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still going on. I've got a cousin named Jeff Mervis, who is the grandson, who was the grandson of
Francis.
Of Morris Plous, and he died of it in the last 2 years, and his mother died of it 30 years ago. So,
Sorry to
and
hear
she was
that,
the second
but-
child in the
okay.
family. Her older sister never developed it.
So when Lewis and Morris came to Kenosha, did they enter the fabric business when they got here?
My father told me they got jobs as bartenders.
Okay.
Good way to start.
Yeah. What happened next, I don't know, but they must have saved their money, and they started a business, a dry cleaning business. This is because the dry cleaning chemicals had just been perfected. Up until that time, if you wore wool, you couldn't wash it because it shrank, and all men wore wool suits. And if you got a spot on the suit, you gave it to your wife, and after dinner she would sit at the kitchen table with a can of carbon tetrachloride and rub the spots out of your suit. But it was never totally cleaned. But with the development of perchloroethylene, they could wash a wool suit and it wouldn't shrink in this petroleum product. So they set up a company to do this. It was a dry cleaning company. But because Americans at that time didn't really know what dry cleaning was and didn't know quite what they were supposed to do with such a company, they also had a line of business where they would dye your clothes. Back then, people would keep clothes going by dyeing them. And so they called it the Union Dye Works. But even though dyeing eventually dropped out and dry cleaning survived, they kept the name Union Dye Works.
As Fritz indicated to you earlier, eventually they moved it to Milwaukee because I think they saw that there was more profit to it there. And it became known as Spick and Span in Milwaukee, and it was the leading dry cleaner in the area for years until they, actually it passed down to their children. But Union Dye Works was located across from where American Motors was, and of course that's all gone now.
The Lakeshore area.
In the Lakeshore area. But one interesting fact, the trucks that Union Dye Works had were kept in a locked area during the night, and they were locked in by some very large iron gates. And when the Union Dye Works was torn down, my father, who was a gardener, had one of those large iron gates hauled over to his house and put into the ground behind his rose garden so that his roses could climb up. And I wonder if it's still there, but it was a wonderful setting for when my sister got married in their yard.
Oh. Okay, and where did you grow up in Kenosha? What neighborhood did you live in?
We were in Allendale.
Yeah.
We're on 3rd Avenue between 71st and 73rd, first living on the east side of the street. And there was a vacant lot across the street where a contractor started to build a home. And my father decided that he would buy it. And my mother said she wanted to move because we were in the same bedroom and we were killing each other. And so it was out of necessity that we
That's
had
how
to
you got your own bedroom.
we had to move across the street.
Okay, what was it like growing up in Allendale at that time?
Well, you know, it was so different from today because today you worry about your kids being out on the street. We were all out on the street. We were playing kick the can, hide and seek, whatever it was. We got into shooting off fireworks, things like that. We could go down to the lake and go swimming, and we didn't worry about crime or anything like that. I think we had a fun childhood growing up and
Yeah.
getting into trouble.
It was very much like you would see in a 1940s movie. Allendale was not fully completed in the 20s when Charlie Allen developed that area. It was cut short by the Depression. And when the Depression came, people stopped. There was no money to build houses. And so Allendale was sort of gap-toothed. There would be empty lots where people were going to put up a house and the house was never built. And I remember there was one empty lot on the southeast corner of 71st and 3rd Avenue, and it was just weeds. You know, there were houses on both sides of it, but there was just weeds. And we used to hang out there, and sometimes we would, in the summer, the city would send a tractor with a weed cutter on it to cut down all the weeds. And once that happened, we would build hay houses. They were like igloos made of hay. And I remember on 2nd Avenue, in the 7100 block of 2nd Avenue, there was a big stretch of empty lot. And the weed cutter came and cut it down. And Janie Gabe and Peggy Frost and some of the other girls built igloos. You could crawl right into them. And I remember I crawled into one once and they weren't there. And there were some comic books in there and some bottles of pop. And it was cool.
We also used to, up on 2nd Avenue, where there was, 2nd Avenue and 75th Street, where Joan Wilk actually lives now, was a sand dune.
Yeah.
And we were very much into, at that time, fireworks and things, and so we would have motorized, like little tanks, and we would set it up so they would drive over a spot where we had a cherry bomb or something, and it would blow up, and we videoed. Made movies.
But with 8mm movie cameras, no electronic video in those days.
So you also mentioned going down to Lake Michigan to swim. Did you do anything else down at the lake at that time?
Well, we used to light fireworks and throw them in the water, but we also found a boat abandoned on the shore at 71st Street in the lake, and ultimately found out that the owner of it had crashed and abandoned it for his insurance proceeds, and we fixed it up, and the neighborhood kids, we used it for fishing and water skiing for many years, and my dad actually bought a trailer that he put on the back of his car so he could trailer us over to Eichelman Park where we could put it in the water. Yeah, so we had a lot of fun.
And we did a lot of perch fishing.
Right. Except that we kept the perch in the boat because we had to put the beer in the net that was over the side of the boat.
So what did your mom and dad do?
Mom was a homemaker, and she liked to play bridge. When she actually became a very good bridge player, a duplicate bridge player. She was a very good cook, sometimes. A trait that she learned from her mother, who was not good at it at all. My dad was a lawyer, and he had a lot of interest in the Beth Hillel Temple. It was the Beth Hillel Temple. You heard us talking earlier. My granddaughter is going to be a 4th generation president of what we call the Leadership Council there. But our grandfather was the founding president, one of the founders, and his name is on a plaque there. And my father was very much involved with the temple and with the Kenosha Jewish Welfare Fund, sometimes a little bit to the distress of my mother, who thought maybe he was spending too much time doing those kinds of things. Okay. But between his law practice and the temple and the welfare fund, I think that occupied a lot of his time.
What kind of law did he practice?
He was a general practitioner. He did estate planning, and he did some collection work, and the same kind of work that I did when I came in to be with him. We were not trial lawyers. If we needed a trial lawyer, we had one across the street who would help us out.
The way I heard it was, my father did not like public speaking. He did not like to litigate in the courtroom. He did not think he had suffered from stage fright. He just didn't want to do it. But he was a superb closed-door negotiator. And is this correct? He liked to get people around a table, close the door,
Yes.
Let's all work out our problems. And he was very, very good at that.
I think I picked up on that too, and that's why I think I felt like I told you when I took the bench as a court commissioner. It was like a job made for me, but I think it's something he taught me, was to be able to get people to talk to each other and solve their problems.
Okay. So where did you go to school?
Public school, Durkee School, started out at Durkee School. then went to, after 6th grade, went to Lincoln Junior High School for 3 years, and then Mary D. Bradford.
Okay.
Me also, but you should know that when we went to Durkee School, we took the bus, and I think it was 3 cents.
It started out at 3. I remember when it went to a nickel, and we all thought it was the end of the world. And my father used to have a little bowl in the kitchen cupboard with nickels in it, and you were supposed to grab a nickel and go get your bus.
Before that, it had pennies in it, I remember.
And I remember Durkee School. It was kind of a charming place. Even in 1946, when I entered, 1945, when I entered Durkee School, it was already known as old. It looked old. It was done in a cheap knockoff Romanesque style and had a big bell tower up on the top. And we had a janitor named Mr. Perry, a tiny little Welshman. And I remember in 6th grade when we were studying geography and we were studying Wales, Miss Shreve had Mr. Perry come in and pronounce some Welsh words for it so we could understand it. I did not realize at that time that southern Wisconsin had a lot of Welsh people because they were imported here to be miners.
Miss Shreve was a 6th grade teacher, wasn't she?
Yeah, and I remember there's a in Wales there is a little town called Llanfair Pwllgwyn Gilligwch or something like that. It's the longest town name in Britain, and they had a picture of the railroad station with the name on it. And she said she would have Mr. Perry come in and pronounce that name for it. We thought it was just hilarious.
Okay, Lincoln Junior High. What was it like at Lincoln Junior High?
Well, one of the things I remember at Lincoln Junior High was that I wanted to be in the mixed chorus with all of the other kids in my class. And there was a day when we all lined up and next to the piano, and the music teacher would play some notes and then we had to sing them back. When I did that, she looked at me and she said, "You should go down the hall and see Mr. So-and-so in shop class." Where I learned how to make an ashtray out of a metal ashtray and a breadboard for my mother. That was the end of my music, beginning and the end of my music career. But what I think Fritz had said earlier, because we lived in Allendale and Lincoln Junior High was west of Sheridan Road, we walked through the cemetery to get there. There was never a bus. But part of our growing up experience was that on 68th Street and Sheridan Road, there was a grocery store called Ann's Grocery Store.
Yes.
And in the back of Ann's Grocery Store, behind a curtain, was a pinball machine that gave free games, because they weren't supposed to do that. And so that was how we would sometimes occupy our time, coming and going to school.
I forgot about Ann's Grocery. I remember one of the things we would do is you could buy little wax bottles and chew the top off of them, and inside there was a little bit of sweet juice. It was just sugar and some cheap blackberry or blueberry flavoring. But that was, and then we would buy a sheet of dots. You would buy a strip of paper that looked like it came out of an adding machine. It had these little tiny sugary dot candies on them, and that would keep you busy for about 6 minutes, and then you'd get bored with it.
And the chemistry teacher was Miss Doherty.
There was a Miss Doherty. Was she the? I didn't have chemistry till high school. I don't think you had that at Lincoln Junior High.
Maybe I'm thinking of high school, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and you both walked to Lincoln when you went there?
Yes.
I rode my bike. I like to ride the bike, and I would ride through those cemeteries. And to this day, I mean, a lot of people say the cemeteries creep them out, but to me, they're kind of cool.
Okay, so you rode your bike to Lincoln, you walked,
Yeah.
and then you went where to high school?
To Mary D. Bradford.
And going to high school at Mary D. Bradford at that time was interesting because we had like an hour and a half lunch period. So we would come out of school and get on the Blue Line bus,
Yeah.
and come home.
Go home.
And have lunch and get back on the bus and go to school in the afternoon.
Okay. So, do you or did you grow up with similar interests, differing interests? Did you ever like, let's you and I go do this in high school or anything like that?
I think that when I told you about the flying, we did a lot of that together with a couple other guys in the neighborhood. We were going to the airport. We went to the Sylvania Airport in Racine County. We took some actual flights. Our parents would take us to Milwaukee, and we'd fly to Chicago. We went from the Kenosha Airport to West Bend?
South Bend.
South Bend, Indiana, and actually found a private pilot there who had a plane big enough to bring us all back, much to the distress of our parents that we didn't come back on a commercial airliner, because at that time you could just walk up to the
Yeah.
counter with your ticket and they'd give you your money back.
And where was the airport at this time?
80th Street and 22nd Avenue, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. Out by Snap-on Tools,
Yeah.
which isn't there anymore either.
No, Snap
building's
there.
They are. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The thing that I would like to point out, the difference between Kenosha then and now. I like to say that Kenosha lived by the automobile and died by the automobile.
Okay.
In the 1940s and 50s, Kenosha was a heavy industrial town, about as heavy as you could get without having an actual steel mill. We had big factories here with smoke pouring out of the smokestacks. We were building cars. Triclover was building machinery for other types of industries. McWhite Company was making wire rope. Wells Company was making the machinery used to make wire rope. And you had all sorts of small machine shops and tool and die shops that were serving the bigger industries. A Frost Company was making plumbing fixtures. You made all kinds of stuff. And when I went away to school, even when I was a little kid, I realized there were other neighborhoods besides Allendale. And the kids from those other neighborhoods, their fathers worked in factories. They didn't go downtown and work in an office like my father did. And I became aware that there were different social classes. And I was not aware, of course, that because of the unionization movement and the advances made during the New Deal, the working class in Kenosha lived pretty well. A lot of those people owned their own homes, and they're sending their kids to college, and they had an automobile. And it was interesting to me as I grew older to realize that there were these other social classes, especially west of the cemetery. The west side of town was where most of the factories were. And you know, Lincoln Junior High School brought me into contact with a lot of those kids, one of whom I'm still friends with. We email every couple of days. But as I say, we lived by the automobile because the automobile made Kenosha rich. But it also kind of killed that old Kenosha because so many people got cars that they started building homes farther out. Kenosha kept annexing more and more territory. So today it's not much bigger in population than it was then, but it covers far more territory, and the urban intimacy is gone. You can't walk out of your house and walk down a sidewalk, and 3 doors away is a family with friends that you played with. It's too spread out, it's too dispersed. I come here and I feel sad because the Kenosha that I knew, which was intimate, and brought all kinds of people into close contact with one another, isn't that way anymore. It's too dispersed, and the different income levels each live in their own subdivision, and they all seem to shop out on Highway 50 and I-94 in shopping malls. We don't have that intimate, tight downtown, which we were in and out of all the time. We'd get on the bus, or even our house was a mile from downtown, so we would often walk it. I remember many times attending a show at the Kenosha Theater.
Right.
We mainly attended shows at the Kenosha and the Orpheum, which was just up 6th Avenue, not so often at the Gateway. But we'd all go in there and watch a Western and an adventure film on Saturday afternoon, and then we'd eat a bunch of popcorn, and then maybe we didn't go to restaurants after. We didn't sit down for a meal. We'd go home for dinner, but we walked down 3rd Avenue and home.
Yeah.
And, that was a mile walk. It took us about 25 minutes to do it. And we got to see all the homes and the different people who lived there. And we just walked along and chewed the fat and exchanged gossip and talked about our dreams and bragged about things we were going to do or that we had done, and maybe we hadn't, but we bragged about them anyway. It was a typical 1950s existence, and I look around Kenosha today and I don't think many kids are living that existence.
I don't think so either, and I think that replacing the manufacturing plants that Fritz referred to is now, you now find that out closer to the interstate in Pleasant Prairie and also in the Kenosha Business Park out where the dog track used to be. We have all these warehouses where trucks are coming in and distributing goods to go to other places, or there are manufacturing plants out there. That's where all the business, I think, is going on now. Although, I don't know, if you walk downtown, there's a lot of new businesses in downtown Kenosha, and it seems to be difficult to find a place to park on the street. And I always wonder where all those people are. Maybe they're living in apartments above the stores. But there does seem to be an influx of young entrepreneurs coming down there and trying to open businesses. Of course, at the same time, we see a lot of our old-time restaurants going out of business and closing, which is, we lost Ray Radigan's, and we lost the Valley, and we lost, I forgot the name of the one that was over by the tracks, the Bartley House.
Ogie Thompson.
Oh, I remember Ogie Thompson's because as a little boy I liked leg of lamb, and they always had leg of lamb, and very few other restaurants had it.
Okay. Tell me about your high school experiences. I mean, did you go through high school in the same kind of group? Did you have completely separate experiences, friends?
Well, we're 2 years apart, and I think that our high school experiences were totally different. Mine was primarily social, and when we were talking before, Fritz was more academic, being involved with the debate team. I seem to be more involved in parties and dances and things like that.
Yeah, I was never a big socializer, and in fact kind of inept at it. And so my socializing was with the debate team, and fortunately, we had a terrific debate coach. He was nationally famous, John Davies, booming voice, red hair, looked kind of senatorial. He had a senatorial face, looked like an orator, and he was, and he taught us to be orators. And the 1958-59 debate team at Mary D. Bradford swept the state. We actually had trouble finding teams that would debate us. Some of the coaches would not let their kids debate us because we were so good. And I remember Davies took us out of state on the weekend. We'd have informal debates just to challenge ourselves. One Sunday, we went down to Elgin and met the Elgin team and debated them. It was off book. We got no credit for it. And another time we took the train down to Hammond and spent a Saturday debating the Hammond team. It was fun meeting those kids from out of town. but we were really good. And of course, in 1958-59, Davies entered me in the statewide contest for humorous declamation, and I won. He had me read a passage in dialect from the Education of Hyman Kaplan, and we went up to Green Lake, Wisconsin. The finals were held in this Baptist summer camp up there in a cold February morning, and my roommate was Dan Travanti, and he recited a passage from Winterset by Maxwell Anderson, and I remember sitting up the night before the big contest. I would rehearse him, and he would rehearse me. Sorry.
There's a story that I can tell that we were both involved with in the kids in our neighborhood too. There became a time when we needed braces, and there were no orthodontists in Kenosha. So somehow our parents found a German doctor by the name of Wiebrecht in Milwaukee. So how were we going to get there? Well, we would get on the train, take the train, not the North Shore, we took the Northwestern.
We took the Northwestern.
To the Northwestern station in Milwaukee, and then we walked several blocks to the dentist, and we would all get our braces checked, and then we would walk back and get on the train, and I think we always had the same conductor who eventually named it the Dentine Express or something like that. And there was one day, for some reason I had to go alone. Nobody else was going. I know, I probably was like 15 years old. And it was cold, and I was wearing one of these big storm coats. And as I'm walking back to the station, I'm going through my pockets, and I can't find my ticket. And of course, I don't have any money. Well, at that time, Spick and Span Dry Cleaners, which had moved from Kenosha to Milwaukee, had their main office not very far from the path that I had to take. And it was a Saturday, but my Uncle Harry, my dad's brother, was in the office. And so I thought, well, I'll go there and he'll give me some money to take the train home. And I went in there, and he was sort of a prankster, Uncle Harry was.
Yeah.
And he made me sit down in his chair in his office, and on his dictaphone, hold the microphone and tell the story about how I had lost my ticket and I needed to come to him. And then he gave me the money, and I was able to take the train home.
By the way, those train trips to Milwaukee led to something very important for me. I had always been interested in railroading, and had been a little rail fan and a model railroader. But as I got older, and I continued to wear these braces at the age of 18, and we got to know the crews. They were always the same conductor and brakeman, and they knew I was a big rail fan, and I was watching all the details of the trip closely and monitoring what they were doing and learning how to read the signals. And one of the conductors mentioned to me that they might be hiring summer help, and that I might be able to get work as a brakeman or a switchman, and that I should drop in at the depot in Milwaukee. Back then, the Northwestern had a big red Romanesque depot on the lakefront, and talk to the superintendent about having a summer job. And I did that, and I got that job, and I worked as a brakeman on the Northwestern for the summer of 1958, earning money for college, because that was going to be my first year of college. And I liked it so much that I came back every summer. And the next summer, there were no brakeman jobs, but there were switchman jobs. So I worked in Kenosha and Waukegan as a switchman. Next summer, I was a clerk in the Waukegan yard office. Next summer, I was a fireman. That's where I really got deeply into railroading, and I've stayed with it ever since. Now I write about railroad subjects and have become something of an expert on the subject. And I'm a passenger rail activist and trying to get this country a modern passenger rail system. And those guys on the Northwestern gave me a big boost in that direction.
Okay, so you left high school, graduated, and you went off to college.
Right.
And where did you each go?
Me to the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana.
And you went,
I went 1 year to the University of Iowa, and then the next 6 years at Madison, the University of Wisconsin.
and then at the end of your schooling, you did what?
Well, I had a law degree, and my father consented to me coming to practice law with him, so I did that from 1967 until he passed away in 1989. And then I continued on as a sole practitioner probably till about 2002, when I closed the law office and became a circuit court commissioner for Kenosha County.
And how long did you do that?
Another 10 years before I retired.
And your graduation from University of Illinois?
I graduated from Illinois, but I stayed on and did graduate studies in Russian language and area studies. I was always a good foreign language student. Did a good job of learning German and Spanish when I was at Mary D. Bradford.
How did you do that?
Huh?
Did you have any difficulty doing that? Both
No,
German
no.
and Spanish.
I sop up languages. Also, I inherited from my grandmother, Adeline Plous, an amazing ability for mimicry. I can mimic almost any accent. I can impersonate people, and my daughter Julia has picked up the same thing. It's been in the family for several generations now. So I picked up German just like that. I picked up Spanish just like that. I went away to the University of Illinois, and along with my journalism studies, I enrolled in German. One day, or one record period, I got a B in German. For the first time, I got less than an A in German. And I was so humiliated, I decided I would not study German anymore. I would take up Russian. This was in 1959, right after Sputnik went up, and the United States got all scared the Russians were getting ahead of us. So in addition to, the Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, which gave out a lot of money to universities to subsidize engineering studies, computer studies, which were very young at that time, but also foreign languages, including Russian. And the University of Illinois built up a big Russian studies department. And so I decided to take Russian to show those German teachers a lesson. And it turned out I was very good at Russian too. And so by the time I was ready to graduate, I desperately wanted a Vietnam War deferment, so I stayed studying Russian. You could get a deferment for studying Russian. That's how scared they were of the Russians at the time. So I just stayed there and did Russian language and area studies for a couple of years. Then I realized I was getting fusty and I had to go out and I'd get a job. So I moved to Chicago, got a job first with the United Press, and then I worked for an engineering company writing a technical manual for a U.S. Army ditch digging machine that this company had designed. And then I went to the Sun-Times and worked there as a reporter, general assignment reporter and feature writer for 8 years. But that takes us away from Kenosha.
It's okay, not a problem.
I love to talk about Kenosha because I really loved growing up here. It was a great place for a kid to grow up. As I said, because of the mixture of social classes and types, I was safe in a nice middle-class neighborhood, but we could go into any working-class neighborhood, and I had friends from those neighborhoods, and it was just an interesting town. Particularly the downtown area was just throbbing. And I remember the day, it was 1952 or 53, when the Kresge's department store decided to open a new store,
And had an escalator.
and it had an escalator, the first escalator in Kenosha. And we went down there and we rode the escalator. By the way, there's a whole chapter of American history, especially urban history and small town history. Dime stores. Today we have dollar stores. Back then they had dime stores, where prices have gone up, of course. And we had three. We had Woolworths, and we had Kresge's, and we had Newberry's. And they were all part of national chains. And they all had similar signs. They would all have a red sign that stretched the full length of the building and had old-fashioned, 1890s raised lettering painted gold. And they all said, we call them dime stores, but they all said 5 cents, 10 cents, $1. And basically they were selling stuff for low price. They all had plain wooden plank floors that were not varnished. They're bare wooden floors. I guess if you had a good oak floor, you could do that. And I remember one of them, I think it was Woolworths, had birds for sale. They had parrots and parakeets and canaries, and it made that end of the store sound interesting. They were all tweeting and chirping, and they smelled a little funny, but people went there and they bought birds. And Woolworths had a lunch counter, and you could get a hamburger there, you could get a sloppy Joe there, you could have a soda or a Coca-Cola, and I just made the downtown was interesting.
Not only that, downtown was, in our day, occupied by mostly Jewish merchants. Members of our congregation, a few years ago, I was asked to give a tour and point out where they were. And if you think about it, there was the Leader store that was owned by the Shemros. There was Brosk Office Supply that was owned by the Brosks, and in front of that was a children's store owned by the name all of a sudden escapes me. But going further down east, you came to Garb's, Melvin Garb.
Luggage.
And luggage and gifts, and then across the street there was a fabric store. Again, the name escapes me. But then there was Morrison's.
Oh, the Sedloff family ran that store. I don't know what the name of it was.
There was Morrison's, Jimmy Morrison. There was the Lepp family that owned Lepps, and the Korf family, our relatives that owned Korfs. And then there
Korf
was
6th Avenue and Lepp and Company were higher-end ladies' ready-to-wear stores.
And there was
A Bell Clothing House.
Bell Clothing House, the Epstein family. And there was the Crystals, Gabe Cohn, which later still exists, but it's not in that family anymore. And there were more. And then, as time passed and those people died out, those stores were all gone.
Was it as those people happened to die out, or was it that other department stores started becoming more popular out in
The mall, the development of the mall might have had
Yeah.
something to do with that, but also I think the children, for Melvin Garb didn't have any children. The Shemro children from the Leader store all moved away. Herbert's actually, Herb Block's daughter-in-law is still running it in a different place. But I remember in the Epstein family, Alan Epstein was a classmate of mine. He moved away to somewhere else. They all
Kids don't necessarily want to take over the business.
some of them became lawyers. In the Lepp family, they became lawyers. Art Korf, our cousin Art Korf, who ran Korf's after he came out of the Army, really didn't like running the retail business, and he went into the McDonald's business around the country and did very well. But nobody was interested in carrying on those.
And then there was centrifugal pressures pulling people out of downtowns. I mean, the automobile and the interstate made it so easy to, you can drive to Chicago in an hour, you know, and you can park in a parking garage and go to Marshall Fields or go to anything else that was open, and you could go to Milwaukee, and then eventually they set up a new downtown along I-94. That's where Kenosha shops today. So
Well, that's common in a lot of communities.
of course. And but that's why I say we lived by the car and we died by the car.
And so you moved away from Kenosha when?
When I went away to school in 1958.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you come back in summer, maybe when you were working on the railroad? and-
Yes, yeah. And during that period, I was sensitive to some of those changes. I could tell that things were changing. For instance, one reason I got a job on the railroad was when I graduated in 1958, my father said, you know, you might think about getting a summer job. They just opened, he said, I just sold a parcel of land out near our old, my parents' home to this company called McDonald's, which is starting up a chain of hamburger joints. I know that guy. I could get you a job there. Why don't you go out and talk to him? And I did go out there. I had never been in a McDonald's before, but I went out. He said, they got a great system. They just make so many hamburgers and they're just booming. So I went out there to ask the guy for a job. But then I looked at the guy frying hamburgers and I thought, I don't want that job. and the conductor on the train I was taking to Milwaukee had already mentioned the possibility of a summer job on the railroad. So I went and asked about that, and
Did that.
no more McDonald's. But already Kenosha was being pulled out to the edge. Remember, McDonald's didn't open downtown. They opened out on South Sheridan Road, which was relatively unpopulated at that time. But people had cars. So driving in a car to go eat somewhere else, that was already old.
Now, you stayed in Kenosha.
Right, and when I graduated high school, before I went off to college, I worked construction for Camosi Construction Company as a laborer. I think I did that, and came back and did that for 2 summers, and then there was a program from the Unified School District where they had summer camps, sort of like day camps outside the schools, and I took a job doing that, you know, playing with kids, playing ball, and doing that. I think I did that almost up until I got married, and then stayed in Madison for law school.
But you saw the downtown changes as he saw them in the late 50s.
Mhm.
You saw more of a progression of downtown to where it is today. Tell me about that period.
I saw it where it became empty. A lot of the stores were empty. There were no businesses, and people didn't go there at all. I mean, a few major stores that I don't know how Crystal stayed in business all those years. It amazed me. But then all of a sudden, I started to see an influx of a lot of like bars and restaurants down there, which seemed to be revitalizing the downtown. People were attracted to it. Like I said before, sometimes you could drive down there and there's no place to park your car on the street, because I assume all these people are either in these businesses or in these restaurants. So the character has changed, and now, of course, they've, with the development of Harbor Park and right next to where the Kenosha Theater is, they've got 63-unit apartment building they've just built. There's a lot of housing down there. What concerns me about that area is, with all of the development of housing in the area, we need a grocery store down there.
Well, that'll now. This is going on all over the country. Deserted downtowns are starting to revive. but not the way they were originally. It used to be you had to go downtown to get your necessities. The new downtowns or the revived downtowns, people go there to get entertainment,
Right.
and spend leisure, including dining. And remember today, because incomes are higher, dining out is not a special treat. People eat out all the time. And there are many, many different formats for eating out. I mean, when we were growing up, there were white tablecloth places like Ray Radigan's and Ogie Thompson's. And then there was nothing else between that and little working man's cafes. There'd be places in the factory districts where you could have breakfast when you got off the night shift and so on. There wasn't much in between. And places like McDonald's introduced, well, first of all, a place you went in a car and you maybe got your food without getting out of your car. And as the highway system expanded and as incomes expanded and more people got cars, several whole new formats for eating became common. The new downtowns or the revived downtowns are taking that into a new phase where people are eating all 3 meals away from home. I know people who don't cook at all, who just either run out and pick something up and bring it home or have it delivered to their home. You can have a car come to your house with a full meal in it, or they pick up something hot and bring it home. So the way we get our necessities has changed, and that seems to have given some old downtowns a new lease on life. Let's see where it goes. I don't, the downtown Kenosha I knew will not come back.
No.
So, John, tell me, how do you see downtowns change and the other developments that have happened? Where do you see Kenosha going?
Well, like I've said before, I'm sorry to see Mayor Antaramian go because I think he was very progressive in terms of building up Kenosha. And I think he's responsible for the fact that a lot of those stores that were vacant downtown are not vacant anymore. And I am concerned about the uptown area. That's where our family had stores, and where they were all burned down. After we sold them, they were all burned down in the riots. And now they've built beautiful storefronts, stores there with apartments up above. But I'm concerned about how viable that will be based on the neighborhood. There's a lot of crime in the neighborhood east of there, a lot of drugs, there's shootings, and I have concerns that either people won't want to rent these buildings for their businesses, or if they do, there's going to be crime issues, and I don't know how that would be addressed. But if you take the whole Kenosha community, including the Kenosha County, I live in Pleasant Prairie, the development that's happened out near Interstate 94 with warehousing and manufacturing that's going on out there is bringing a lot of people into the community, and it's bringing a lot of money into the community. For those of us who live in Pleasant Prairie, our real estate taxes went down because there was a lot of tax money being paid by these businesses out there. And I think really that's where the future is. Although all the development that's going on downtown, I think it's happening on both ends.
What about the Kenosha Innovation Neighborhood?
I think that's a great idea. I'm glad that there's a lot of money being put into it. This is where Bonnie Hain used to be.
Oh, yeah.
The old Chrysler property.
Yeah, and it's all been rejuvenated and cleaned up, and now they're building out there, and they're going to have this facility that allows startup businesses to learn.
An incubator.
Like an incubator, yeah. I think it's a very good idea. I'm glad that the mayor was able to get the money to do it. I hope I'm around long enough to see be successful. But it's a great thing, and it's great for the neighborhood.
Little Kenosha story, if you want some more reminiscence. In my freshman or sophomore year, freshman year of high school, you spent at juniors. Sophomore, you went to the annex. And my sophomore year, which would have been 56, we had a wonderful English class taught by a great teacher named Leonard Kaczynski. He was a young, like mid-30s Polish guy, an ex-paratrooper from Milwaukee. And he made English class more interesting than, I mean, the kids loved him. We all loved him. We had a great time in the class. Even kids who weren't interested in language became interested because Kaczynski was so good, and the class spirit was wonderful. And we were coming to the end of the academic year. It was May, and he said, you know, why don't we all have a party? Why don't we all get together and just have a party? And I had never heard of this being done by a class at Bradford or anywhere in
Just
school.
the English class?
Yeah,
Or-
it's just
okay.
an English class.
Okay.
But because he was so interesting and he knew so much, we ended up learning a lot of stuff besides English. We learned a lot of history and diplomacy and warfare. You know, he was an ex-paratrooper, but everybody loved him. So let's have a party. So we all came up with, I don't know, $3 a piece. And we said, where will we have the party? Sandra Cicchini said, oh, my mom owns a bar up by the harbor called Emma's Club 6, and she's got a party room in the back. I'll talk to her and see if we can get, well, she took care of it. And that was a part of town I didn't know too well. Up where 6th Avenue bends, right after you go across the bridge, right in the angle, there was Emma's Club 6. And it was a waterfront saloon. And our family didn't hang out in waterfront saloons. It wasn't all that tough, but it was different. I mean, that's one of the areas where you saw the class divide in Kenosha. So on a warm May evening, we have this party. And sure enough, she had a room in the back, and it was a long room, and we had one long table, or maybe she had a bunch of tables put together. But we had a wonderful party, and one of the reasons was, as soon as I walked in there, it just smelled heavenly. And we went to this back room, and Sandra Cicchini's mother came in and started distributing pizza. And I had never had pizza before. I had heard about pizza, because this is the 50s now, remember? Sometimes you would be watching TV and a comedian from New York would talk about pizza. They joked about it. It was just starting to move out of New York and out of Chicago. And I'm sure it had been in Kenosha for a long time because we've had Italians for a long time. Anyway, they brought in these things called pizzas, and her mother sliced it up in squares because it was, as I later learned, much later, there's tavern-style pizza, which is the Chicago Midwestern version, which was cut in squares, and there's the New York style, which is called a pie, which is cut in wedges, and I didn't know about any of those. But anyway, I started to eat this pizza. I thought it was just wonderful, and I came home and I started raving to my parents about it. Well, it turned out that out on 22nd Avenue, 22nd and 60th Street, where the family owned this little strip of stores, there was a store, and my father was the landlord, and it was called the Uptown Bar and Grill. It was a little one-story strip of stores on the west side of 22nd, and my parents started taking us out there on Sunday evenings, and my mother didn't want to cook. She said, let's go to the Uptown and have a pizza, and we did. And they served the same kind of pizza. And today in Chicago, that same kind of pizza is served by Lou Malnati's, and that's the kind I always order, just plain onion, green pepper, Italian sausage, not pepperoni. I don't like pepperoni. I never had that in Kenosha. Just Italian sausage with fennel in it. And that's my favorite pizza today, and it all started in Kenosha. And it's now spread across the country. There are a lot of people that insist on tavern-style pizza.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
This is fun.